Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ServiceChannel webinar, where we're going to be talking about how you can unlock 20% savings, by using provider performance data. Really happy to have you, attend and, connect with us today. Really excited to get into this content. Next slide, please. I just wanted to start by giving everyone, introduce myself, and Khalid will go next. My name's Todd Lutwack. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketplace Development here at ServiceChannel. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And before I joined ServiceChannel, in my previous career, I actually had spent almost 12 years at eBay. And while I was at eBay, I was the Vice President of Selling. So I was responsible for all the people who sold goods, in the United States for eBay. And why that's important is what we learned pretty early on at eBay is that the buying experience that that a buyer has is actually determined by the seller on eBay and not really determined by eBay itself. And that eBay needed to play an active role in encouraging people to improve the buying experience. For example, when I started at eBay in 2000, the policy was you had 30 days to ship your item when you sold it on eBay. And when I left eBay in closer to 2012, it was, I was spending all my time and energy with the people who could ship within an hour, as an example. So when I learned about the ServiceChannel opportunity, I was like, I think I saw a tremendous number of parallels, and we'll talk more about them in a few minutes, about how we can work very closely with the providers to improve the service level and the outcomes for all the subscribers like yourselves. Khalid?
And I'm Khalid. I do all things provider optimization here. So whether that's looking at bigger picture trends in provider performance, whether it's evaluating the 70,000 that we have on the platform today, and as we'll get to in a little bit, evaluating your specific networks. If you're a current customers of ours using current data, comparing your providers to the other 70,000 that are out there on ServiceChannel, or if you're a prospect, being able to get your list of customers and identify how your providers perform relative to all the customers that they have on ServiceChannel.
Great. So just, a little bit of the logistics for the webinar itself. If you have any questions during, anything that I'm saying or anything that Khalid's saying during this, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A tab. So, please feel free to go ahead and hit that tab and ask any questions. And some questions, if they're simple and easy, we might address during the webinar itself, but we will be doing a question and answer session at the end of this webinar and look to engage with your great questions. Moving on. Just by way of background, I know there's a lot of people on this call who are actually ServiceChannel users already, but there are a host of people that are not currently on ServiceChannel. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about who we are and where we came from in order to get a lot of the data that we're talking about today. ServiceChannel is the #1 facilities management platform. We have over 500 customers. We currently help manage over 360,000 locations with our software. We have over 70,000 providers on our system. We've done about 18 million work orders in the last year. We've done about 112 million work orders in total, with about $43 billion in spend on our platform. And it is this basis of a lot of this information in these transactions that we have built up, what we're about to talk about today. And that's what gives us the information that we need to come to the conclusions that we are going to be discussing here. So, the first polling question, so let's open up our first poll, right? When we're talking to facility management teams, one of the things we talk about is, what are the roadblocks that you face in currently switching, providers today? So, you see there's a bunch of, A, you're unsure whether a new provider would perform better. B, don't want to create disruption for your location managers. C, you lack the time to find and evaluate them. D, it's difficult to onboard new providers because of, procurement or legal, or E, that you lack choices. We'll leave this panel, if you guys can answer, we'll leave this open for about another 30 or 45 seconds, and then we'll share the answer. But this is something that, we talk a lot about, with our customers about, how much to change providers. And these are some of the, the comments that we get back about, we would change more if it not be for this. So just curious for the people that are on today's call, which are, what are the main causes of that? Are we ready to get the answers, Shruti? They'll bring up here the polls. There we go. So it looks like, A and C were okay, it looks like this one, this one was more than one apply, okay? So, it looks like, unsure whether, a new provider, would perform better, is the number one answer. Lack of time to find and evaluate them. We hear that very commonly, and difficult to onboard new providers to our procurement and legal. No, that's a good basis. Thank you for those answers. And, we'll be talking a little bit more about that throughout this session. Let's move on to the next slide. So getting into today's topic, what's really interesting is, very often in business, people say quality, speed, price, choose two. Usually they say you can't have it all. And what I'm happy to report is, through a lot of data investigation, we see that it is more than possible to have it all. Some of the conclusions that we have sort of seen, from looking at this, these are some of our observations. Number one, it's incredibly difficult to build out a provider network. My heart goes out to facility managers and procurement teams. They are trying to make very difficult decisions with a very, very limited set of information. And most often that information is actually user generated. It's provided by them, a provider saying, yes, I perform that service, or yes, I cover that trade area, as opposed to any sort of, third-party validating source. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And then the next thing that we see is networks stay in place far longer than they should, even in cases of significant underperformance. We can look at the data, we can see where we see strong performance, we can see clear underperformance. And, very often, we see that, they're leaving underperformers in place way longer than they should, for a lot of the reasons that you as a team expressed on, during that poll, that it's just more difficult, and, and we're working to help make that easier. This is something that's very interesting that we have uncovered in our data. The providers actually know if you are actively managing the roster. While we can actually look, this is actually very interesting, and that is, while we very often are talking to subscribers and we talk to them about, all of the providers that they have servicing them, every once in a while we can actually do analysis, or we can do it anytime really. We can look at the providers and then all of the people that they provide services to, and then see who they are performing better for and who they are performing worse for. And the data is crystal clear. Providers know who is actively managing and who swaps out provider networks regularly, and they perform better and at lower prices when they are working on those accounts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And again, the reason why people have, above is, swapping out providers has been more difficult than a lot of people had planned. And, we're going to be discussing, how we can make that easier. So next slide, please. So earlier when I said most people, you make decisions off of a very limited set of data, the first thing I will tell you is the biggest data piece that people ask for is, what is someone's hourly rate? Okay. And, if you were to look at this, this is sort of like, the most basic information someone would get, provider A's hourly rate, provider B's hourly rate, and even their average invoice, and there's a lot of teams that sort of, this is what they base their decision on. Next slide, or, just add to this. Then, you see that this, and by the way, based on what we saw, most companies would choose provider A over provider B, with the logic being their labor rate's cheaper, they will be a cheaper option. Now we add in a little bit more information, and most people, figure out trip charge. This isn't something, most people will get this information too. Now you start to see that these two things are actually a lot closer. But when you start getting into what I'd kind of call the deep ServiceChannel data, this is what we are able to uncover, is how fast people work. What you see here is provider A, completes their work, in under 2 hours, only 9% of the time, where provider B completes their work, 36% of the time in under 2 hours. And conversely, on work orders that go really long, provider A, 18% of the time is going over 5 hours, and provider B only goes over 5 hours, 4% of the time. So what this has led us to do is to create a new metric, okay, that we call invoice median net of proposals. And basically, this is our best estimate. This is far closer than using averages, okay, just the means, to tell us where we expect people to fall. And what you'd see here is provider A's invoice median net of proposals is $482, and provider B is actually more than 20% less than provider A, right? And this is, the first takeaway that I want you to have is, believe it or not, there is virtually no correlation between labor rate and invoice median. Okay, this is really important. Most of the people that we talk to and teams are focusing a lot more on labor rate because it's data that they can have and it's easily accessible and they can put in a system, and sometimes they could say, oh, I negotiated the rate down and things like that. But what our data would suggest is, very often, and we will show you this later with proof, very often the lowest labor rates are correlated to the highest average, median invoices, and very often the highest labor rates are most often associated with the lowest, right? So this is sort of, debunking a very, very important myth. Most people are focusing on the labor rate when the truth is time is really the big delta in pricing here, right? So this is, that's one of the most important, sort of takeaways that, we want you to have from this. Next slide, please. So where we get all of this data, right? So, before I explain to you all of the transactions that we've had and a little bit of the history of ServiceChannel, so on the 112 million work orders, we are now capturing between 200 and 300 data elements on every single work order. And you sort of see here a list of all of the different things that we capture. There's a lot more that we capture besides this. Some of my favorites are, most important things are just resolution time. That's really important. Quality, cost, and all of these other things that are around here sort of, feed into these bubbles as well. But this is how we get this, this is how we get this data, is the ServiceChannel operating system sort of requires people to check in and check out and use a lot of the tools and things that we have. And this is, not only very important from a data standpoint, it's incredibly important from an accuracy and billing standpoint as well, where we see, a high percentage of check-ins and check-outs. Those are unbelievably correlated with some of the most competitively priced invoices, as an example. Next slide, please. This is really, I know it's going to sound like a lot of data, but this is the most important, way that we look at the providers on ServiceChannel. Basically, the way to look at the providers is that there's a top quartile, there's a top 25%, then there's a second 25%, a third, and obviously a bottom, right? And what I want you to focus on first, okay, let's look at the third column, first time completion rate. Right? That is an incredibly important metric that, people are very, very focused on, along with, obviously total resolution time is, obviously highly correlated with this, right? But this is, what you'd see here is the top quartile literally does, first time completion 79% of the time, where the bottom quartile was only doing it 37% of the time. And you can sort of see there that the corresponding average resolution, column one to the left of it, the top quartile has a resolution time of 3.4 days, and the bottom quartile is, literally almost 5 times as long to solve problems. This is unbelievably clear in our data, right? That there are top performers and there are bottom performers, right? And you can see, whether, you can look at some of the other metrics, but here are so now I want you to look at the farthest column on the right. And what you'd see here is that the top quartile, very often, now we're looking at, obviously this is quartile in performance, okay, has a higher, labor rate, okay, now it's interesting that second quartile is a little bit higher than the first, right? But you can kind of sort of see, how some of those are, are laid out. But then the median cost per invoice, I want you to look back to the first column. The top tile, the people who are delivering the fastest service, the highest first-time completion, are actually the customers who have the lowest, invoice median net of proposals, right? So, this is where we are seeing that performance and price are actually highly correlated in this. And it's because both performance and price are highly correlated to speed. Right, and that's what we are seeing, right? So this is the basis of and obviously this is across the plumbing network. This is true across every one of the trades that we have seen. That there's a big difference between the top quartile and the bottom quartile, and we'll talk with our customers. We'll show them this. We'll go through the examples, and and say we think we can help you swap out the bottom quartile with people in the top quartile, save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the process, depending on the size of the network, while simultaneously dramatically improving performance. So this is really the basis of our, so much of our work. We'll come back to a chart like this. Next slide, please. So let's now go to the next polling question. We'll open the poll, please. And that is, in a given year, what percentage of your providers do you think that you have replaced? Right, and you see A is, sort of 0%. We don't really replace them, or just a few. B is, I think we replace 1 to 5%. C, 5 to 10%. D, 10 to 20% of the providers, or E, over 20% of our providers. So, I'll leave that open for, another 15 or 20 seconds, let you guys answer. And this is obviously one where you can only do one answer. The last one was, multiple answers, obviously. Trudy, can I see the poll results, please? So, 1 to 5. Okay, came out to be the most common answer, and then 5 to 10 second. And, this is probably pretty consistent with, what we see on our platform. I'd say that, one of the most common, we see, changes in, like the 2 to 3% range is probably what we see. What I would say, the optimal results, and we give an example of this later, it's probably closer to a number closer to 10 is what we're seeing, is where we've seen sort of the best results. And then there is a point of diminishing return. So, this is what we were, I was alluding to earlier, actively managing and replacing underperformer providers leads to lower costs. So when we looked at what we called a static network, a network that almost made no changes, what we saw is they were paying in, 2/3 of their peers were sort of getting better prices than they were getting, right? So that is, and 2/3 of their peers were getting better performance. We are sort of, we were seeing that pretty clear. And then there's, the cost savings that we are seeing here between the static networks and the agile networks was about 25%. Next slide. And this was something that I alluded to earlier, and this was when I was sort of saying, your providers know. Like, your providers know when they are working at a static network and when they are working at an agile network. What our research, showed is, this is just, we're sharing the 34% just the first time completion number, but we've seen it in a bunch of the other numbers. When they are performing, the same provider is working for what we determine as an agile network, okay? They are a significant increase, a 34% increase in their first time completion. And we see a significant increase in all of the other metrics, even including price as well. The next slide. For those of you who are not on ServiceChannel today, we have the option of, you can actually let us know who your providers are. We can sort of run them through our filters, and we could sort of give you back the scorecard. We will give you back the scorecard in aggregate. We won't sort of say this person's an A, this person's a B, this person's a C, but we will say of your network, this is the percentage of your network that is A's, this is the percentage of your network is B's and C's, in some of our, in our metrics as well. So if you're, wondering what the quality of your network is, you don't have to wonder any longer. You can submit it to us and kind of come back and let you know of what kind of quality network that you are currently operating or managing for your, stores or restaurants or grocery stores, things like that. Next slide.
Yeah, and if you're a current customer on ServiceChannel, what we can do is use your data on ServiceChannel with your providers to do a network assessment and show you which ones are underperforming, which ones are performing really well, and quantify how much you could save and improve store experiences by swapping your underperforming providers with the very best in that trade in that location on ServiceChannel. And we'll go through a quick example of this in a second, but we typically do it for repair work orders only. And the reason we focus on repair work orders is, as you've all experienced, I'm sure a ton, providers can be very creative in where they hide costs. They can charge you a labor rate of 75, then spend 6 hours on site, mark up the parts. There's really an unlimited number of possibilities where they can add costs there. So for lack of a better term, that's where you can really get ripped off by a provider, and you will see a massive spread in provider performance when looking at repair work orders. Whereas a maintenance work order, there will be a spread, but at least they'll quote you up front and say, I'll do this job for $300, for example. So we do this for the trades with a lot of repair spend. That's HVAC, refrigeration if it's applicable, kitchen equipment if it's applicable, plumbing, electrical, and general repairs. And what we do is the following. We look at your providers. We do this trade by trade in a given trade relative to each other, and then relative to the others on the platform in that area. And the first thing you'll notice is there is a massive spread in provider performance here. So this is looking at the median cost per invoice paid to each one of these providers. There's some coming in below 300, some at 400, some at 500, and then one at 600. And these are all providers working on the exact same type of stores. When we showed this to the client, the first thing that they tend to ask is, okay, what about geography? Geography has to be explaining this. That's what this bottom row here is. We're considering how these providers perform relative to other plumbers in similar areas to similar clients. So if you're a quick service restaurant and this is looking at plumbing, we'll look at the plumbers in New Jersey relative to other quick service restaurants. And what that's saying here is provider one is more expensive than 91% of the plumbers that are doing work in that area for similar clients. And where this is most important is with big metro areas that tend to have a lot of union labor, a lot of traffic. Looking at provider four, for example. So provider four, a median invoice cost of $477 versus provider five here at $467. Provider four is in Manhattan. So that's actually a pretty competitive cost for Manhattan. It's only more expensive than 44% of the providers there. Provider five is outside of Houston. So you would expect a much better cost than what you're getting for provider five. And that's indicative of where you can get significant improvement. And when we show this to a client, typically what happens is they say, let's see the labor rate. Let's see the labor rate. And as Todd mentioned, labor rate really doesn't drive this much. And the reason for that is mainly due to the skill of the technician and the incentives at which they need to work. So if you have a master plumber, for example, who's costing you $120 per hour, they tend to get the job done so much faster than a journeyman or an apprentice that the total cost per invoice will actually be much lower, your recall rate will be lower, and your first time completion will be higher, and your speed will be better. So looking at the red providers versus the dark blue providers from the last chart, again, same client, same stores. The blue providers, the cheaper ones, are better on first time completion. For plumbing especially, that is critical for your store experience in addition to cost. And then looking at the speed here, what's really driving this difference is percentage of work orders under 2 hours. The dark blue providers had twice as many as the red providers. In percentage of work orders greater than 5 hours, the red providers had 5 times as many work orders greater than 5 hours as the blue providers did. And the natural reaction, because we've all used this so long, is I still want to see the labor rate. So let's get into the labor rate. Provider one here, which happens to have the most spend out of any other provider on this page, has the cheapest labor rate on the page. Provider 21, which is the cheapest provider, has the second highest labor rate and a labor rate in the triple digits. The most expensive labor rate is in the best third of cost. And the reason for this is because, again, the skill of the technician and this speed. And like I mentioned, provider 1 has the most spend out of any provider on this chart. This client saw the $68 labor rate and expanded them everywhere they could possibly go. So they expanded them where there's longer drive time. So this has some travel time in here. They expanded them in areas where they had to subcontract out work, which leads to even higher costs because they were relying on the labor rate to constantly make the decision when, as Todd mentioned, labor rate is almost completely uncorrelated to the median cost per invoice. So looking at this labor rate here, it is almost all driven by speed. And that's what we can do for you in these assessments is show you the speed, which is your data that you have, but also show you the speed of the other 70,000 providers. So when you're looking at replacing provider 1, instead of just getting that labor rate and even invoice average, what you get is their speed and their invoice median and their invoice median net of proposals. And the net of this was that we ended up replacing these providers with ones that were about 39% cheaper, which if you go back here, that 323 is right in line with the top ones already in their network. Savings percentage on replace spend was 39%, on the total trade was 19%, and first time completion of the red providers went from 64% to 76%. So if you're a current customer of ours, what we can do is you can request an assessment through your account manager or reach out to any one of us and we can get going on one of these assessments for you. If you are not a customer of ServiceChannel, what you can do is send us a list of your providers and we can break them into A, B, C's, and D's as Todd mentioned before.
So again, these, some of the key takeaways, it's because of the data, right? It is, everyone right now is using a set of data. They're only, able to really see how people are performing at their stores. They know the quality of their network, but they really don't have real benchmarking ability to see what's happening. And this is now what we are starting to bring into this equation. Okay. Just very, very important. And again, I think what's very important is that, the savings that we are talking about, it's really not savings unless you can feel an increase in the quality and speed, right? That is really what's important here. And, and we get this, by partnering and working very close with the providers who are performing, right? I mean, it's very clear. We see this in our data that, it's, when you replace 250 batters, a baseball player with a 250 batting average with someone who bats 420, they're going to get more hits. Your team's going to score more runs. You're going to win more games, right? There's no such thing as the perfect provider, but there are clearly providers that are significantly better in performance and price than other providers. So what we're talking about is, increasing your access to finding them, onboarding them, and partnering with them through a program like this. So, with that, there's a whole bunch of questions. So, why don't we, let's get into them, right? So the first question that came in is, how long does it take to complete one of these assessments? It's an excellent question. The process for this is, you would ask your account manager, contact ServiceChannel. Probably best that we have a quick call to understand what it is you want. Some people, instead of wanting the whole network, they want a certain region or a certain trade. It might be better to focus, in a specific area. But this is something that takes us, a day or so, right? So it's really, once you let us know, what it is that you're looking for, we can do the analysis and then, and set up a meeting and we can, have a conversation like this with you inside of a week. So that's sort of the first one. What trades does this type of analysis apply to? Khaled gave a list before. We can, obviously we have the data on all of the trades on ServiceChannel, but, I think Khaled gave, some of the, the areas where we saw the biggest impact, was definitely HVAC, plumbing, electrical, general handyman, and kitchen equipment. Those were sort of the biggest buckets there, that we've seen this. And, not only does it correspond to a lot of work orders, but those trades actually correspond to a significant amount of the spend as well. So that's where it can make a real impact, for companies in their operation. Does the assessment program cost anything? It does not. It is, we're happy to share with you the data from the ServiceChannel platform and how it can help your business, as customers here. The next question that came in, do the conclusions vary by trade, by big aggregators versus self-performers? The answer to this question is absolutely. We are definitely seeing, through the data that, local self-performers have the highest quality work at the lowest prices. That sometimes can include regional self-performers might sort of, mimic some of those behaviors as well, versus, large aggregators and brokers. The data is crystal clear that very often when people are using brokered solutions, we very often see prices that are in the ballpark of 20 to 30, even 40% sometimes, more expensive, relative to the other options by trade, by geo, and corresponding usually with significantly longer resolution times. As well, right? So yes, there are some, as far as the conclusions varying by trade, we see a lot of consistency by trade, but we definitely see the big differences are between sort of the type of provider is a big part of this as well. And we have solutions sometimes even as well when some people say, okay, I don't know if we're set up to manage, a large number of local self-performers. We can help people do some of that too. In certain cases, people have come to us. What do I need to do to request my provider assessment from, or, who do I need to, request this? Your account manager, and I think even at this, right here, even to the right, of the screen that we're looking at, it basically says, get your tailor, your assessment right here. And this would be a way of reaching out and contacting us, servicechannel.com, /provider insights. And then that will get routed to the right teams and we would be happy to do the assessment for you.
Hey, Todd, let me
next
jump in and answer one here.
Sure.
There was one about how, speed may not necessarily equal quality, and that if you push your vendors for speed, that could lead to bad outcomes on the quality side. And we totally agree with that. Completely agreed. Speed is different from quality, but what we've seen in the data is that if they work fast, they tend to have low recall rates as well. And that's because the providers that are working that fast and have the low recall rates are the master plumbers, the skilled technician. So it's all based on the skill of the tech. So if you have your current providers and the techs aren't very skilled, pushing them to go faster is absolutely going to sacrifice the quality of work that you're going to get. But if you replace that technician with one who's more skilled, you'll be paying a higher hourly rate, but the total cost per invoice will likely come down. Your speed will increase, and your quality measured by recall rates and how much they have to come back will go down as well because of the skill and experience of that technician.
So I actually want to comment on the same question for 1 second, though. And I think this is really interesting because part of this question, the exact wording of it was, and I've had this question lots of times, are you guys measuring people that are good at ServiceChannel as opposed to people who are good at their jobs, like, doing this in what you are doing? And sometimes people will say to me, I know of XYZ technician who doesn't check in, but does the work and shows up on time or whatever. And we will capture all of that and know that in our system as well. So they won't be dinged for, because they did the work quickly. But the one thing I will tell you about people who are good at using ServiceChannel, quote unquote, or, touching the ServiceChannel buttons is the other expression that I hear, what our data would suggest is people who use check-in and check-out of ServiceChannel actually have lower invoices. Like the data is pretty clear on this, right? And that is, when people check in and check out, we also have that validation. We know someone was only there for 2 hours and 12 minutes, so they can't bill for 4 hours, right? So that's an important element too, from us. It is, yes, we can look at total speed, but what's important sometimes about people who are following the rules of ServiceChannel or hitting the right buttons is it does lead to lower, invoice costs. So this is important. Next question, do you actually visit every invoice to record the hours worked to, determine the provider speed? We look at as many invoices as possible, right? Yeah. So the answer is, do we look at 100% of the invoices? Sometimes there's not the data, associated with a specific invoice because of maybe some way that something was set up, but that's obviously the exception and not the rule. So we try to use every invoice when possible, to come up with our analysis. And the next question, what about callbacks for these speedy vendors? So that kind of stuff. Again, we are absolutely looking at the recall rate and the quality as part of this. I do not want anyone on this call to think in any manner, shape, or form that we have just solved for speed and we are sort of creating other issues. We are obviously looking at all of these factors: speed, quality, recall rate, all of these different things, before we make some of these suggestions. The next question. What is your opinion on flooding these vendors because they are A and now are a B or C from being, I'm not so sure I understand the question, but again, what I think that the important thing is we're partnering with the vendors. We want to work very, very closely with them. We think that the close partnership and relationship with the vendors is a best practice. We want to work closely with them. And it's very important that they know that their work is being looked at individually, that their work is not being aggregated. I have this expression I like to use: there's a reason why artists sign their paintings. It's because they're proud of their work and they want you to look at it and say, oh, what else has Todd painted? Kind of thing, right? So the truth is this is the important thing that we've seen with subcontracting, is when people are sort of not getting full credit for their work and they feel that they're being like obfuscated through layers, that's when we actually see the hours get longer, the performance decrease, and the prices go up. And that's what we have in the data, and happy to share some examples, of that. I think that, while there's a few more questions, I think that, there's actually a bunch more questions, but we're running out of time. Happy to answer any and all of these questions, when we're doing assessments with people. I think it's great to sort of talk through these, and get some of the specifics. Happy to do so. And again, the best practice is if, whether you're an existing ServiceChannel customer or you're not, follow this, get your tailored assessment, follow this link, set up a meeting, and we will, either do an analysis of your network if you're not on ServiceChannel, and give you those grades, or if you're on ServiceChannel, we could do one of these more detailed analysis that Khaled sort of just highlighted right here by trade or by geo, and we look forward to working together. And thank you, and have a great day.